Do your MIDI drums sound fake and robotic? Well, you're not alone. This is a common issue that many metal guitarists face. Hi, I'm Sebastian, and I have been programming drums for my own band and mixing MIDI drums for others for years. I have seen the same mistakes repeated over and over, and I have learned how to fix them. By the end of this video, you know exactly what to avoid and how to achieve realistic, powerful drum tracks. In this video, we're going to break down the 5 most common mistakes metal guitarists make when programming drums and show you how to correct them. Programming MIDI drums is a crucial part of modern metal production, especially for home studio guitarists, but it's easy to make errors that leave your drums sounding lifeless. So stay tuned to find out the key factors that rob your drums of realism and how to fix them. Alright, so jumping right into it, mistake number 1 that I see all the time is maxing out the velocities on every single hit. You know, just slamming those drums at full force constantly. I get it, you want your drums to sound powerful, but trust me, this is the fast track to fake sounding drums. When every hit is at the maximum velocity, it creates this unnatural machine gun effect that's a dead giveaway that you're using MIDI. To avoid this, you need to add some variation to your velocities. Think about it, when a real drummer plays, there's always slight differences in how hard they hit each drum. Some hits are a bit softer and others are a bit harder. That's what gives the performance a human feel. Let me show you an example. Hear the difference? The maxed out version sounds stiff and robotic, while the one with the varied velocities has a much more organic and realistic vibe. This is especially important for your snare and tom hits. Uniform velocities on these drums are a major red flag that screams fake drums, so spend some time adjusting those velocities to create a much more natural sound. Remember, avoid the temptation to crank every velocity to the max. Embrace the power of variation and your drums will start sounding like they were played by a living, breathing drummer. Okay, let's talk about articulations. These are the different ways a drummer can hit a drum or cymbal, and they're crucial for adding depth and realism to your MIDI drums. Think about it, a real drummer doesn't just hit everything the same way. They use different techniques to get different sounds out of their kit. On the cymbals, you got things like bell hits, bow hits, and edge hits, each one with a distinct sound that adds variety and nuance to the performance. But where articulations really shine is on the snare drum. Mixing in some regular hits, ghost notes, and even the occasional flam or drag can really bring your MIDI drums to life. It's all about creating that sense of a real drummer with dynamic, expressive playing. Hear how much more interesting and authentic that sounds compared to just using one articulation for everything. So as you're programming your MIDI drums, think about how a real drummer would approach the part. What articulations would they use to add flavor and realism? Experiment with different combinations and see what works best for your track. Trust me, taking the time to craft realistic, expressive articulations can make the world of difference in the overall impact of your MIDI drums. It's one of those subtle details that separates the amateurs from the pros. Alright, so you got your velocities varied and your articulations on point. But another common mistake that can make your MIDI drums sound stiff and robotic is leaving the timing static. When every hit lands exactly on the grid, it creates an unnaturally perfect feel that it's a dead giveaway that you're using programmed drums. To avoid this, we need to introduce some natural timing variations to mimic the way a real drummer plays. No human drummer can hit every note with machine gun precision. Those slight imperfections are what give a performance its organic human feel. Here's a practical example to illustrate the difference. Notice how the first version sounds rigid and lifeless, while the second has a more natural, fluid groove. That's the power of timing variations. Most modern DAWs like Studio One have a humanized function that automatically introduces timing variations. I recommend setting it to adjust the timing by 3 to 7% for a natural yet tight sound for metal. Hear how that breathes life and realism to the performance? Another key concept to keep in mind is that nothing ever hits the same ever. When you're programming things like cymbal crashes and snare hits, resist the urge to place them perfectly in unison. Instead, slightly offset their timing to create a micro flam effect, simulating the natural inaccuracy of a real drummer. The difference is subtle, but these details add up to a more authentic drum performance. So remember, embrace the imperfections and avoid the stiffening effect of static timing. Your MIDI drums will thank you for it. Okay, next up, the other common mistake I see all the time is not accounting for the difference between a drummer's dominant and non-dominant limbs. Most drummers have one side that's stronger and more coordinated than the other. It's usually the right side for the right-handed drummers. So what does this mean for your MIDI drum programming? If you're not considering limb dominance, your MIDI drums are going to sound like they're being played by a superhuman drummer. The hits from the dominant side should be consistently a bit louder and more precise than the weaker side. This concept is super important for creating realistic drum rolls. Pay attention to which limbs are playing which hits and adjust the dynamics accordingly. A little velocity variation goes a long way. Another spot where limb dominance comes to play is with double kick parts. Notice how the right kick is consistently hitting a little bit harder than the left? That's how a real drummer would play it, so that's how we should program it. I cannot stress this enough of how much of a difference this makes. So as you're programming your MIDI drums, always keep in mind which limbs should be playing each hit, and adjust the velocities to reflect the dominant and non-dominant balance. Alright, so the last trap that's easy to fall into when you're deep in the programming zone is writing drum parts that would be physically impossible for a real drummer to play. I'm talking about those parts that would require an octopus behind the kit to pull off. Here's the thing, when you're working with MIDI, it's tempting to go wild and program those crazy over-the-top drum fills and rhythms. But if you want your drums to sound realistic, you need to make sure that a human drummer could actually play what you have written. So how do you do that? The key is to visualize the part that you're programming. Imagine yourself sitting at the drum kit and try to air drum along with your MIDI part. If you find yourself running out of limbs and contorting your body in unnatural ways, that's a red flag that your part might not be playable. Another thing to keep in mind is that drummers only have 2 feet. I know it sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many MIDI drum parts I have seen that have the kick drum and the hi-hat pedal going at the same time, at speeds that no human foot could possibly match. The same goes for the hands. There's a limit to how many things a drummer can hit simultaneously. If your part has the snare, all the toms, and multiple cymbals hitting at once, it's probably not going to be playable. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have fast technical drum parts on your track, but the key is to make sure that they're within the realm of human possibility. A good rule of thumb is to limit yourself to 2 or 3 elements at a time. Kick, snare, and hi-hat, or ride cymbal, rack tom, and floor tom, for example. If you're unsure whether your part is unplayable, try programming it at a slower tempo first. If it feels doable at a slower speed, then you can gradually ramp up the tempo until you hit the limit of what's physically possible. At the end of the day, the goal is to create drum parts that sound impressive and energetic, but also realistic. By keeping the playability in mind as you program, you avoid the trap of writing parts that would stump even the best drummers in the world. Well, there you have it, folks. The 5 major MIDI drum mistakes that every metal guitar should avoid. By steering clear of maxed out velocities, using articulations, humanizing timing, and taking into account left-right dominant hands, you'll be well on your way to crafting realistic and hard-hitting drum tracks. Remember, the key is to approach your programming with the mindset of a real drummer. Consider the physical limitations and nuances that make a human performance sound authentic. And it's all about striking the balance between creating exciting parts and maintaining believability. And if you're looking to take your metal guitar mixing skills to the next level, be sure to check out my video on how I mix metal guitars linked here. It's packed with valuable insights that will help you streamline your process and achieve professional results. So go forth and program with confidence. Armed with the knowledge to avoid these common pitfalls, your MIDI drums will thank you, and your metal tracks will hit harder than ever before. Peace out.